Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I'm looking at the Fujifilm XF35mm f2 lens. So when I first migrated to the Fujifilm X system from Nikon DSLRs, I was looking for a nice, sharp, fast prime lens. I started out with the Fuji 18-55 f2.8 to f4 sort of kit lens, and that is actually a superb lens for what it is. For being a kit lens, it's actually pretty fast, it's sharp, it's got good autofocus, and it has stabilization. I'll probably do a video for that in the future. But after that initial lens, I wanted a nice, sharp, fast prime lens, and something kind of equivalent to a fast 50 in full frame terms. So I was looking at the 35mm focal length. Now at the time, this was before the 33 1.4 that just came out was out. It was really between the 35 f2, which is this bad boy right here, and the 35 f1.4. So there are a few really important distinctions between these two lenses. First of all, it's the 1.4 versus the 2, the widest aperture. What do you get with a wider aperture? More light, better low light performance, shallower depth of field, that sort of thing. But also between the two, the 1.4 was a lot bigger, a lot heavier. It's an older lens design, being one of the first few prime lenses Fuji came out with. And also, the newer f2 lens has weather sealing, whereas the old one does not. So in the end, I decided that lightweight, small size, weather resistance were important to me, so I ended up going with the f2. In this video, I'm going to tell you why I went with the f2 versus the 1.4, my experience shooting with it over the last 9 months. I'll show you a few example photos. I'm not going to show you any images of brick walls to see distortion or sharpness into the very, very corners, to do any pixel peeping or anything like that. It's all about the experience using the lens and if I think it's worth it. Let's take a look. One of the most important factors of this lens is its size and its weight. It is incredibly small. It's lightweight, about 6 ounces. The size of it reminds me of when I used to shoot micro four thirds with the Olympus system. Some of those lenses were just so tiny, and even though this is just an APS-C lens, it's still quite small. It's easy to just throw in the pocket or mount to the camera and keep it glued there, and it creates a really small portable system. The lens has a metal body and mount. It feels solid, well built. The aperture ring has really nice smooth clicks from f2 to f16. You can also lock it at the auto aperture setting and let the camera decide, or control the aperture with the camera. It is weather sealed. I haven't had too many opportunities to take it out in the rain, but knowing that it has that sealing, along with my X-T2 and X-T3, I can take my camera pretty much anywhere, including in relative downpour, and not worry too much about it. So that's a really important distinction between this lens and the 1.4. There is a variant of this lens, which is the XC 35mm f2. They're optically identical, but the XC variant has a plastic body and doesn't have the aperture ring. So I decided that those two features were things that I thought were incredibly important and worth the extra cost. It doesn't come with a hood out of the box, or at least the one that I got. I ended up purchasing mine refurbished, which I do for pretty much all of my lenses, but I did pick up this really cool square hood. It's not the, that is not going to focus on that, is it? No chance. It's a Haoge H-A-O, I'll put a link in the description below. It is a metal square hood. It mounts really easily to the front of the 35mm lens, and it blocks a lot of stray light and glare and things like that. Makes the whole thing feel more like a Leica. The aperture ring, as I mentioned, is clicked, and it's got a very satisfying, But I don't really care for declicked aperture lenses. I don't shoot that much video, and when I do, I'm usually stuck to a particular aperture. I like to feel what aperture I'm at while I'm shooting, and having that tactile feel is really important. The manual focus for the lens is focused by wire. It has a small but well-damped focus ring. Now, it being focused by wire, that means it's telling the autofocus system to adjust focus. So it's not as smooth as it would be if it were just an entirely mechanical manual focus. But it is very easy to manually focus with the X-T2, X-T3, X-T4 with focus peaking. It's smooth from foreground to background. I really enjoy the manual focus of this lens. Speaking of focus, the autofocus is very quick, it's very quiet, very accurate in my experience, and that's one of the other distinctions between this one and the 1.4. This being a much newer lens, Fuji was able to put all of their latest technology in the lens so that using it for video, using it in quiet situations, counting on that autofocus to be accurate, I think this tends to be a better buy in that respect. The bokeh of the lens is really nice. I know it's just f2, so it's not too terribly wide apertured. You're not going to obliterate backgrounds like you would in f1.4 or 1.2, but when you do have enough distance between your subject and the background, or if you're focusing on something that's really close to the camera, you do get really lovely, sort of creamy out of focus areas. And for an f2 lens, that's actually fantastic. Now, in the bokeh of the lens, if you're shooting wide open, I have noticed a little bit of a cat's eye shape to the bokeh in the outer edges of the frame. So that's something to keep in mind. Close focus for the lens is around a foot, which is not terribly close. You're not going to do any macro photography with this. Unless you get an extension tube. I hear that the extension tube pairs really well with this lens, so that's a great buy. Even wide open at f2, and I do shoot it at f2 so much of the time, it's bitingly sharp. Something that really, really surprised me. I didn't want for image sharpness. There's no softness, there's no ghosting. It's really lovely, even shooting wide open, even within its closest focus distance. Something I did notice when shooting high contrast areas wide open, there is a little bit of longitudinal chromatic aberration, so you get a little bit of purple and green fringing, and that's something that can be corrected by stopping down or using the tool in Lightroom to correct it. It takes a little bit of work, but you can get rid of it. What do I use this lens for? So for the most part, 50mm equivalent. This is a 35, so it's about a 53mm equivalent. It's a really good walk-around lens. I use it when I want to pick out elements of a scene rather than get the whole scene in the frame. I use it for detail shots, for food photography. Also, it tends to be a really good lens for portraits, particularly from waist-up portraits. And seeing as I don't typically carry my 85mm equivalent, which is, I have a Viltrox 56mm f1.4, I don't carry that around all the time unless I'm expressly there to shoot portraits. So this 35mm is really great for shooting portraits, but also being able to shoot other things at the same time. This lens, as small as it is, pairs really well with my X-T2 or X-T3 to create a really small, compact, unobtrusive combo that I could take everywhere and still be able to get a wide variety of shots. A few cons of the lens. It's not all perfect. There are a couple things that I've noticed over the course of time that could be better. One of those things is the close focus distance isn't as close as I would like. I still use it for food photography and things like that, but if you're doing product photography, if you're really trying to get close to your subject, it's a little bit more difficult, especially if you're shooting something on your table and you're sitting at the table. You do have to kind of lean back to get it all in frame. Now, being an f2 lens, sometimes it's not quite fast enough to get low noise, sharp shots in extremely low light situations. Those are situations where you might want to shoot for the 1.4. So, in conclusion, the 35mm f2 lens is small, lightweight, compact, it's weather sealed, it autofocuses quickly, it creates beautiful images, and I highly recommend it. Thank you so much for coming along with me, and I hope this has been helpful to you in some way. If it has, please remember to like this video and subscribe for more videos like this. I am working on a review of the 18mm f1.4 lens, which is extraordinary, and that's going to be coming up pretty soon. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.